Good morning and welcome to this video on Othello by Shakespeare. Today we're going to look at Act 1, Scene 3. This is the second video on this scene, so I would suggest that you watch the first one first and then watch this one, and it'll make a lot more sense to you. Okay, so today's big question then, remember we're always oscillating between the big question and the finer details, is does Shakespeare challenge contemporary racism, and if so, how? So it's very similar to a question that we looked at in a previous video, and we're going to have this in our mind as we look at Othello's two big speeches in the scene. In terms of the plot so far, we've seen Iago and Rodrigo awaken Brabantio, tell him that Othello has eloped. It's a very racist scene, and then we've established that actually Othello and Desdemona have definitely married and that he loves her greatly. And now Othello has been brought in front of the Senate for two purposes. The first one is so that the Duke can get him to lead the Venetian army against the Turkish fleet, and the second reason is to justify why he has eloped with Desdemona. And this is the first speech that he gives in his defence. He says, "Most potent, grave and reverend signors, my very noble and approved good masters." And the first thing that we notice here is the rhythm of Othello's speech. Now, lots of students tell me, well, you can't tell if he's speaking in blank verse or iambic tetrameter or whatever it is. Lots of students kind of suggest that that's impossible to work out. But a couple of years ago, I watched a TV version of a play by King Charles III. It's an absolutely brilliant play. And the first thing that you kind of noticed was that the characters were speaking in this iambic pentameter rhythm. They were speaking in blank verse. And my husband, who doesn't particularly have much knowledge of English, turned to me and he said, "Why are they speaking like that?" And he instantly kind of realised that they were speaking in a way which is a bit different to the normal patterns of speech. So I would say to those students who think that talking about blank verse and rhythm is a bit of a waste of time, actually, if you sit down and you pay attention to the play, you can tell where the characters are speaking in blank verse and where they're speaking in prose. And in case you don't know, blank verse is iambic pentameter. That's unrhymed. So iambic means that it's da-da. So we have an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. And you'll see here in the first line, I've underlined the syllables that are stressed. So most is unstressed, pot is stressed, ent is unstressed, grave is stressed, and so on. So the pentameter then means that we've got 10 syllables in a line. So pent as in pentagon, you've got a 5-sided shape. You multiply that by 2. So the first part of the pentameter means that you've got 5 feet or 5 pairs of syllables in the line, and then so you multiply your 5 by 2, you get 10. So you're looking for 10 syllables in total. So if you were talking about iambic tetrameter, for example, well, a tetrahedron, we're thinking about 4 sides. So tetrameter, 4 sides, you've got 4 feet in the line, 4 pairs of syllables in the line. So you multiply your 4 by 2 and you're looking to get a line of 8 syllables. So we've got iambic pentameter here, and this shows us that Othello has a very, very good command of language. He is an absolute master rhetorician. He's able to speak very well in public. And as we've talked about in previous videos, this would have been Shakespeare challenging contemporary racism. This is Shakespeare showing that Othello isn't uneducated, that he's not irrational, but that actually through his speech he has a good level of education and he speaks very rationally, and in fact is the best speaker in the play so far. In terms of the words that he's using then, so he talks to these leaders of Venice as being potent, being powerful, being grave, being serious, reverent, they're revered, they're very important. He recognises that social importance. They're noble, which of course in Shakespeare's world is a wonderful compliment to give someone. It means you've got great integrity as a leader. You're approved, people like you, and you're good, you've got a good level of morality. So Othello is really laying it on thick here in terms of complimenting the people that he's talking to. He doesn't just use 1, 2 or 3 words to compliment them, but actually we've got 6 words to compliment these people. So Othello is really working his persuasive language devices here in order to get his listeners on his side. And another good way to do that is to recognise someone's social position. So he calls them signors and masters. Othello is showing here that he recognises that he's lower in the social hierarchy than the people that he's speaking to. He's acknowledging their power over him, he's acknowledging that they're in control of the situation, or at least he's pretending to tell them that they have control, because what he's going to do now is he's going to manipulate them, he's going to persuade them, he's going to use every weapon of language that he's got in his arsenal to get them on his side. Then he says, it is true, I have taken away this old man's daughter, I have married her. And at the bottom of the screen there you can see that later on he says, I won his daughter. Now, the marriage between Othello and Desdemona is one of genuine love at the start of the play. However, there are hints all the way through Act 1 and Act 2 that maybe the foundation of this marriage is a little bit more precarious than Othello actually realises. The fact here that he talks about taking Desdemona, I won his daughter, as if she's a prize, an object, shows that maybe he values her for her social status, for her beauty, for whatever it is that she can give him, rather than valuing her as an individual in her own right. So there's a suggestion here that Othello's approach to the marriage is quite patriarchal, and that he thinks that he can objectify Desdemona. And then he says, rude am I in my speech. So my speech is a bit coarse, it's not very good. He says, I'm little blessed with the soft phrase of peace. I'm not blessed. I don't have the kind of phrases, the kind of language that people use in peaceful times. Because he's been in the army for so long, he's very good at speaking in that kind of military style, probably speaking in quite a coarse way with other soldiers. But he's saying that in this kind of political space that he's in at the minute, that he doesn't have the language to be able to speak properly in this space. Now, this could be a technique called sprezzatura, which was described in the 16th century as being a nonchalant denial of your ability. So kind of, throw away, oh, I'm not very good at that, but actually I'm absolutely amazing at it. It's pretending that you haven't thought too much about what you're doing. And that gives the appearance of truth rather than being something artificial. So if you think about the last time you didn't do your homework, you probably prepared a little speech to give to your teacher. I'm terribly sorry, I didn't do my homework, I've got so many deadlines and I realise that I've made a mistake, blah, 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 whatever it is. So you've prepared it, but you're going to give that speech as if it's kind of off the cuff, as if it's in the moment and as if it's completely true. But actually it's quite artificial. And so if Othello is using this technique of sprezzatura, what it tells us is actually he recognises the power of language to manipulate other people. And that's really interesting, because what does Iago do in the play? Well, he uses language to manipulate other people, and Iago is probably on stage watching Othello, watching his master do this. So in a sense, Iago's learning from the master, and then he's going to put exactly this same technique of linguistic manipulation into practice later on in the play. So anyway, leaving that aside, Othello says, I'm not very good at speaking in public, I'm going to do my best. I will a round unvarnished tale deliver. And this idea of it being unvarnished suggests that there's going to be no elaborations, no decoration, there's no kind of little lies added in to what he's going to tell. He's going to tell the pure truth. But unvarnished is juxtaposed with the word tale. And the connotations of the word tale is something that's probably imaginary, something that might be a bit strange, a bit unusual, a bit wild, a bit adventurous, but it's probably not entirely true. So we have the juxtaposition of these two kind of contradictory words here, and that leads us as an audience to question just how much Othello is telling of the truth. And that comes up a little bit later when he says what he said to Brabantio earlier on. So we're probably still not entirely on Othello's side here in the play. He has our sympathies for lots of reasons, but we maybe doubt his veracity, his honesty a little bit. Now, whether Othello is aware that actually he's not always honest is kind of unclear in the play. And then Othello says, since these arms of mine had 7 years' pith, so since I was 7 years old, till now some 9 moons wasted. A moon would last for a month, so until 9 months ago, they have used their dearest action in the tented field. So Othello is here saying that he's been in the army since he was 7 years old until 9 months ago, and we reckon he's about 40 at the minute. So he's been in the army for quite a long time, and he says, little of this great world can I speak more than pertains to feats of broil and battle. So he's again using this idea of sprezzatura. He's saying that he's not very good at speaking about anything other than what happens on the battlefield. There could be another reason why he mentions this, though. He could be reminding his seniors, his masters, that he has served them well, that he has been loyal to them, that he is brave, that he's a good military commander, that he knows what he's doing, and that he is a heroic character. So again, Othello's pretending to be quite humble here. But underneath that, there's this sense that he knows exactly what to say to these people to remind them that they owe him because he has served them. And that echoes what he said to Iago in Act 1, Scene 2, I have done the state some service. And then they have a little bit of a chat and so on, and Othello is allowed to speak about how he's fallen in love with Desdemona. So we get this absolutely incredible speech, which starts with, her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me the story of my life from year to year. So it seems that Brabantio often invited Othello round to his house to tell him amazing stories about his life. And we can question Brabantio's motivations here, because it seems, from what Othello is going to go on to say, that Othello has been used maybe as a form of entertainment, that's been passed off as Brabantio's social acceptance of Othello, but actually he just wants to hear these amazing stories, which are the equivalent of whatever box sets we have on Netflix at the minute. And it's interesting that Othello says he often invited me. Othello's gone round lots and lots and lots of times to tell Brabantio these stories, still questioned me. So there's this sense that these meetings with Brabantio have happened quite a number of times, and that Othello has been exploited by Brabantio as this form of entertainment. And Othello says, I ran it through. So it almost seems to be here that Othello has told his story, he's performed his story quite a number of times. You know, if you talk about practicing for a performance, you'd say, let's have a run through. You know, so it seems as if Othello might be aware that he's been exploited by Brabantio. On the other hand, maybe he's not aware that he's been exploited, and maybe he actually believes that Brabantio does love him, or did love him, in a sense that he was love meaning a kind of sense of loyalty, a sense of acceptance at this time. So maybe Othello has been blind to Brabantio's true intentions. Maybe Othello has seen Brabantio's friendship as giving him a kind of legitimacy in society. You know, this is it, I've been accepted, I'm being invited round to this guy's house, and I'm accepted in society. Or maybe Othello was very much aware that actually this wasn't always the case, that he was being used by Brabantio. And the stories that Othello tells are just incredible. He talks about moving accidents, hairbreadth escapes. So, you know, there's moments of real tension when you just about escape from death, being sold to slavery, incredible landscapes whose rocks and hills whose heads touch heaven, of cannibals, of men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. As Othello progresses in this speech, the scenes that he's talking about get more and more outlandish. And all of these descriptions echo the narratives of exploration that would have been becoming increasingly accessible to Shakespeare's audience of the day. During Elizabeth's reign, there was a huge amount more travel. You know, Walter Raleigh, for example, travelling around the world, and people would have written down their narratives of the incredible, unbelievable things that they had seen. And often these narratives would be very much embroidered and added on to with a real layer of fantasy. And so we can understand here that maybe Othello's narratives that he's given to Brabantio haven't always been quite honest, and that they are this form of entertainment. They are the equivalent of reading a story of exploration, you know, an almost fantasy story of exploration. And in the background, all of the time, Desdemona's been listening. So this to here was Desdemona seriously inclined, but still the house affairs would draw her thence. So she was supposed to be doing the housework, was supposed to be organising the housework, and she would every so often just listen to a little bit of Othello's story. So she's becoming more and more interested in him. And with a greedy ear, she would devour up my discourse. Now this is really interesting, because here we've got a woman who's greedy for the company of this man, who's devouring him. It's kind of the wrong way around to what we would expect in a patriarchal society, and it seems that Desdemona is making the first move here, that she is showing her interest in him before he's shown his interest in her. And this happens again later, yet she had wished that heaven had made her such a man. So after Desdemona kind of waits in the shadows and the wings, listening a little bit to Othello's stories, he has found the time to see her on her own, tell her all of these stories in person, just the two of them. And then she says that she wished that heaven had made her such a man. Now this line is really ambiguous. There's two possible meanings here. Either she wished heaven had made her such a man for her to marry, that there was a man exactly like Othello that she would be able to fall in love with. Or that heaven had made her such a man that she could have been a man who could have had such adventures. So we're getting this sense that Desdemona is maybe not a very stereotypical female character in the play. And then again, she makes the next move. If I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. So basically she's saying, I'm falling in love with you. I love your stories. You're an interesting person. And if you know someone else who's exactly like you, I would fall in love with him. So she's saying that to Othello, and upon this hint I speak, Othello understands what Desdemona is saying to him, that she's falling in love with him, and so he speaks his love as well. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. Now, on the one hand, this is a beautiful articulation of their love, and there's a really nice balance to these two lines. She loved me, I loved her. You know, that repetition of that phrase shows the reciprocal, no, I can't say the word, how she reciprocates his love and he reciprocates her love. But there's something else going on here as well, and it shows that the foundations of their love are quite precarious. So she loved him because he'd been through dangers. She loved him because of the stories that he had told. But as we've already discussed, are all of these stories true, first of all, or are they, at least in part, fantasy and imaginary? And what happens when Othello retires from the army? What happens when he doesn't go through these dangers anymore? And is that all that he is, just a great hero who's able to go through dangers? What about in the kind of everyday, humdrum, day-to-day life? Will she still love him then? And Othello loved her that she did pity them. So he loves Desdemona because she likes his stories. There's not a real sense here that he loves Desdemona for who she is as a person. He just likes the fact that she likes him. So whilst it might seem like a beautiful declaration of love, it is quite questionable whether this is going to be a really strong marriage throughout the rest of the play. And then Othello says, this is the only witchcraft I have used. So echoing the earlier statements in the play that Othello had used magic and witchcraft to manipulate Desdemona, he says, absolutely not. The only witchcraft I used is words. Now, taking that at face value, he hasn't used any witchcraft at all. There's no magic, and Shakespeare is challenging the racist stereotypes of the day that would say that people who are black are in some way associated with magic. However, Iago is going to take this and he's going to use a kind of linguistic witchcraft, linguistic manipulation later on in the play in order to manipulate Othello and Desdemona and get them to do what he wants them to do. So there's kind of two interpretations of this speech. On the one hand, Othello is defending himself. He's saying, look, I've been honest, I've been genuine, all I did was talk to Desdemona. She fell in love with me first, I then fell in love with her, and that's it. On the other hand, Othello has flattered his audience. He's repeated these possibly slightly elaborated tales about his background and his heroism. He's explained that the love that he feels for Desdemona and that she feels for him is maybe not a strong foundation as it could be, but that he loves her very deeply anyway, and so on. Is he being a little bit manipulative of the senators? And is that manipulation justified so that he can stay married to her because he loves her? So there's so many kind of questions about this that we're not going to resolve in this video, but there are things to think about as you're reading the rest of the play. So what I want you to consider then is our big question for the day. Does Shakespeare challenge contemporary racism? And I've got an activity for you to do to help you with that. So the statement here, whereas Shakespeare alienates the audience from Brabantio in Act 1, he is at pains to garner our sympathies for Othello. So Shakespeare alienates the audience from Brabantio. Brabantio is a racist character, but he also looks ridiculous. So when we think about racism, we're then connecting it with this ridiculous, melodramatic, over-the-top, very unpleasant character. So that's Shakespeare encouraging us to reject racism. On the other hand, we're sympathetic to Othello because what he's doing is trying to convince people that he genuinely loves his wife and that he has a right to stay married to her. So to what extent do you agree with this statement? I want you to find some points and some evidence from the text to support your ideas. In terms of disagreeing, I suppose the only thing I can really think of off the top of my head in terms of how we might not sympathise with Othello is that we might have a few question marks over his honesty at this point of the play. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and we're going to look at Desdemona's character in Act 1, Scene 3 in the next video.